Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Lens, where we speak with global leaders and industry veterans to really break down marketing strategies, industry trends, and make sense of this new normal that we are all living in. I'm Shiny, your host for today, and I also handle content for AdTech and iMedia. We have with us Simon Kemp, who is the founder and CEO of Kepios and the Chief Analyst at Data Reportal. Welcome, Simon. It is great to have you at the Leadership Lens.
Thanks for having me, Shiny. Great to be here.
So Simon is a renowned and well-known speaker who helps the world make sense of what people are really doing online. People in over 230 countries read his marketing books, guides, and global digital reports. Apart from Kepios and Data Reportal, he sits on the advisory board for the world's most progressive marketing services organizations. He has helped define the brand and marketing strategy for some of the world's most admired brands, including Google, Unilever, Coca-Cola, Diageo, and Nestle. And he continues to advise the world's top marketers and investors on the latest trends and global digital behaviors. So we hope to have you unravel some of these insights for us today, Simon. I am really excited for the conversation. In fact, I have your report open in front of me, which is the Digital 2021 Stat Bites. And if I look at the report for this year and the last 5 years, in fact, I see considerable change, especially in the last 1 year in terms of, mobile usage, social media behavior. The sheer number of people who are coming online is amazing. TV and print, though, seem to be on the losing edge. And, entertainment is very, very important. Looks like we are all that's priority for all of us, in fact. And search is not just limited to the search bar anymore. I mean, there are so many ways we are searching. What does this really mean for the marketeer who is, suddenly being blasted with all these changes and, suddenly people are a kind of a different animal almost. The behaviors are very different. How should they kind of rethink, readjust, revamp their spends and their strategy? How should they kind of broadly go about this?
There's a lot to unpack in that first question. Thanks, Shiny. So I think let's start with the growth, first of all. As you rightly pointed out, there's been a lot of growth, but there's been a lot of change in the online behaviors of the world's internet users as well. So in terms of growth, we saw a lot of expansion of audiences, especially thanks to COVID during 2020, and that's continuing into 2021 as well. The numbers that we reported in our 2021 global report for internet use were actually a little bit low, mainly because research into internet user growth was very much limited by the sort of challenges of COVID, if you like. So internet user research requires face-to-face interviews. Even if we do it by the phone, then that skews the answers to people who already have a device that would allow them to access the internet. So I think that the 7% annual growth that we saw in internet users around the world was actually a lot lower than the real number. And I'm looking forward to seeing the correction in that number once we can get back to proper internet research. The growth of social media users is probably a good reference for how much digital has grown overall. We saw nearly 500 million new users in social media last year, which is just incredible. So 13% year-on-year growth in social media users. And just in case people are going to challenge that as they're listening to it, that is unique users. So that does not allow for duplication across different platforms. Those are individuals who've come on to social media in the past year alone. So incredible growth. But those are just the headline numbers, though. I think some of the things that you pulled out in your intro question there, so things like new search behaviors, the fact that we're consuming a huge variety of new kinds of media, and we're also mixing our media habits. So when it comes to something like TV, we're now mixing between broadcast, between cable, and then also we've got streaming. When it comes to sort of what we used to call print media, so things like news and magazines, we've still got the physical versions, but we've got digital versions, we've got apps, we've got websites, you've got all these different ways that people are consuming content today, and that's continuing to evolve. I think it's possibly a misconception that things like TV and print, what we might call conventional media, which is ridiculous because media is media. But I think, the old fashioned stuff that we had before the internet, I think there's a lot of perception that those things are challenged. I think the medium itself, so the delivery mechanism, especially when it comes to physical media like newspapers, it may seem like they're more challenged, but in reality, a lot of those businesses have moved their content online and their readership remains relatively similar to what it was previously. So I think try not to get distracted by the delivery mechanism. These are opportunities for us to reach audiences, and whether those audiences are online or offline, the opportunity remains relatively similar. How you go about using content obviously can vary, but remember that the audiences are going to be relatively similar. And I think even when you're comparing social media channels, that's the same thing too. A lot of us get distracted by, oh, should we be on TikTok? Should I be on Facebook, Instagram? The audiences are broadly the same once you start analyzing social media platforms at a high level. What they do on these platforms varies quite dramatically. But once you look at the overlaps in audiences, so just for context, at a global level, 16 to 64-year-old internet users, we're seeing an 85% overlap in TikTok users who also use Facebook. So don't get distracted by these stories in the media. The audiences are often very similar. As I said, there's a huge amount to unpack in there. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to give you a couple of things you might want to dig into. Search behaviors are really important, and there's a lot to dig into there, but there's a variety of different stuff. So I'll let you pick and choose where you want to go from here, Shiny, before I talk for an hour, and that's us going.
So, but what does this really mean for the marketer, Simon? How should, while we have all this being thrown at us, what should they really be doing?
That's the magic question. So many numbers. What's the advice? I think my first tip, and this possibly is a little bit counterintuitive given that I love the numbers and the trends, take a big step back and don't panic. I think there's a huge amount of information out there. There's a huge amount of trend analysis in the media, and it can be very, very easy to get distracted by that. I think, especially when we start looking at the tools, it's easy to think that you need to buy every bit of software, every vendor out there. They've got these amazing propositions. And as a marketer, we get FOMO, just like our consumers do. If I had this tool, would suddenly everything become easy, and would I become marketer of the year? The easy answer is a lot of these tools are simply better ways of delivering stuff that we're already doing. If you can afford them, that's great, but you don't need every tool in the toolbox. You need a couple of core things that you use every day. And just as a carpenter is going to have a magic set of tools, just as a chef is going to have their favorite set of knives and whisks and whatever else, you're not going to use all of these tools every single day. I think prioritize. What are the things that your business wants to achieve? That's the absolute number one thing you need to start with. So based on where you are today, what do you want to change? Who are the audiences that you want to reach? Where are the best places of delivering the messaging and the content to those audiences that are going to affect your business outcomes? And that's already 80 to 90% of your job done. Once you understand those things, it becomes a lot easier to identify the tools, the platforms that are going to make that easier. So don't get distracted by user numbers. Don't get distracted by trends that the media are hyping. Know your audience, know what your audience cares about, and prioritize. And hopefully that then makes your life easier and saves your budgets.
Absolutely. So know your audience, have a favorite set of tools that, speak to them, and keep it simple, really. Do not overcomplicate life.
Absolutely. So, I spend all my life looking at these tools. Let's take social media as a great example, right? There's so many different things out there, 17 platforms with 300 million monthly active users, at least 17. That's a huge amount of reach. And therefore, we've got all these different options, but you do not need by any means to be on even more than 3 or 4 of those in order to reach the majority of social media users. So take a big step back and say, based on what I want to communicate with my audiences, which of these platforms has the best creative formats for me to do that? And even more importantly, which of these is going to be the most efficient from a cost perspective? So in order to get any of that reach, you're going to need to buy paid media, because organic reach is so low on social media these days. You're going to have to pay for that reach. Choose which one is the most efficient. You don't need to have a massive following in order to take advantage of that paid media opportunity. So look for which one's cheapest to reach the audience you care about. As long as it's got a good ad format, then you're good to go.
Value for money. So
that's the way.
2020. So 2020, like you said, everyone needs to have a favorite set of knives or tools that really, does the job or does 80% of the job. Especially in marketing tech, we've seen this, the role of technology is kind of, I would say, evolved to a very, very large extent in the last few years,
Mm.
be it meeting platforms, we're doing this on Zoom and content platforms. At least in India, I know so many people personally who bought their groceries online for the very, very first time. And, e-commerce is surging. How
Yeah.
do you see it evolving in Asia, e-commerce? How is it evolving in Asia vis-a-vis, I would say, more developed markets like the US or Europe? What is your take on that?
So I think, let me just sort of put some context in here. This idea that somehow Asia may be behind more developed economies is actually a complete distraction. When you look at the data, the highest levels of adoption of e-commerce are actually in Asia. So we look at Indonesia as being, amongst internet users, the greatest number of internet users that are buying stuff online every month. So in terms of adoption, Asia's already at the forefront, if you like, of e-commerce. In this region, we have less money to spend on a per capita basis, and that may be one of the things that sort of gets distracting from a marketer. But that's the same offline and online. I think we need to be very sort of cognizant of the fact that the consumer has a certain amount of money and they're choosing where to spend that, whether it's online or offline. But don't for any moment think that online channels are not a good option, because it's very clear that people are spending a lot more time and a lot more money online than they were previously. When you look at the grocery one particular, I think this is where it gets really interesting. So grocery e-commerce is a really, really useful indicator of where the online shopping industry is at. When we see growth in online grocery shopping, that is usually a good sign that the overall e-commerce industry is about to grow, because grocery is a high frequency category. I'm sure everybody watching today knows that already, but it's that frequency that's really important to understand the opportunities in e-commerce. If I used to only come online once or twice a year in terms of what I bought, I maybe bought a new fridge, or I maybe bought electronic items online once or twice a year, but when I was buying my groceries, I would go to the store. Once people start buying things like groceries online, they're basically using e-commerce platforms on a weekly basis. They become much more confident, they become much more familiar. And because they're already buying grocery things online, once you start looking at the big grocery platforms, the likes of Amazon Fresh, you've got various other ones around the region, obviously, but once you get into that, there's the opportunity to add other things that aren't groceries into your cart. And then all of a sudden, e-commerce becomes top of mind for the shopper. And therefore, the whole sort of range of different items that we buy beyond grocery expands because of the grocery habits. So we saw huge growth in groceries during 2020, online shopping. That's going to have some really interesting implications throughout 2021 and beyond. This is not a behavior that's going to go backwards. People will go back to physical stores once they can, but the habits that they've adopted during COVID are going to remain, and people are going to be buying a lot more categories online as a result of that too.
Absolutely. So groceries kind of, gets over that inertia, that initial thing about using my wallet online, and
Yeah.
gets people going. Not like we had a choice; we just had to do it. We had to buy food.
Yeah.
So great. Any other major e-com trends that you're seeing in Asia as COVID rises in 2021, apart from the grocery? Anything else that you'd like to point out?
The amount of money we spent online grew considerably. I don't think that comes as a surprise, but it's reassuring to know that. I think some of the interesting trends that I'm looking at in the data, so all of the data in our reports focuses on consumer behavior. So unfortunately, I don't have a huge amount of insight into whether this platform is outperforming that platform. But some of the things that I'm quite interested in, search, we need to dig into this search topic. So changes in search behaviors are very important from an e-commerce perspective. The ways that people are going about looking for information about brands and products that they're thinking of buying is changing. So especially when you look at markets like India, the rise of voice search is critical. I'm sure that marketers within the Indian sort of world know that this is a rising trend, but just how big it's become is perhaps still not talked about enough in the marketing media. So nearly 60% of Indian internet users say that they're using voice search every month. That's huge. India is the country with the biggest adoption in the world, even greater than China, which perhaps comes as a surprise considering how much voice is being used in China already. From an e-commerce perspective, that's really important, because the way that people express their queries using natural language when they speak into a voice interface is quite different to the SEO and SEM habits that we've learned through the typed stuff. When you get into things like vernacular languages, again, I don't need to tell you guys how important this kind of stuff is, but the fact that people are able to perhaps use a greater number of different languages in voice search than they might do in typed search. People are much more likely to be able to speak than they are to read and write in a variety of different languages. They're much more comfortable entering queries in various languages. So from that perspective, I think e-commerce brands and retailers definitely want to be looking into the implications of that. We've then got things like image search, so using an image as your query, snapping a picture of something on a product shelf or even in your house, and then using that as a search. Hugely popular across many developing economies, and particularly important in India as well. So India again ranks above the global average there. And we're seeing high use of search on social media too. So I think this is definitely of interest in India. India has some of the highest use of social media anywhere in the world, especially when it comes to the variety of platforms that people use. So people are going into social networks and looking for information about brands and products that they're interested in buying. Again, India's over-indexing here. So when you're looking at the new behaviors, dig into the local reports. We've got, I'm looking at it down in front of me right here. We've got a full free report on changing behaviors in search in India that you can dig into, all the numbers in that India report for 2021. So definitely one to watch. The one other trend that I think might be quite interesting is the rise of live stream commerce, which has been big in China for quite some time, especially on platforms like Taobao, Tmall. We're seeing a lot of influencers coming in and selling products through live streams. That is taking off across the rest of Asia, and we're seeing it gaining some momentum in India. Still not quite to the same level as China yet, but especially again with those issues around literacy and multiple languages, I think you're going to find that it's a huge opportunity in India. So definitely one to watch and maybe experiment with quite soon as well.
Search is a leading indicator for e-commerce, something that all marketers should watch out for. So voice, be set on voice search, visual search, social media search, and obviously the search on e-commerce platforms. And live stream content or shoppable content, as we like to call it here. Amazing. So coming from that and talking about content and shoppable content, what really started as a business model for a lot of these startups, which was direct to commerce, direct to consumer, D2C, as we like to call it, is now becoming a marketing strategy for all our legacy brands. Some of the brands that we spoke about, some of the brands that you kind of talk to often. And this has become a very, very, it's become a huge bandwagon where everyone's jumping and everyone's talking about it. They want to get it right. How big is the opportunity for D2C in India? And what are the categories that should really focus on this kind of a strategy?
Yeah, so there's a lot of chatter in the marketing world around D2C, as you rightly point out. And I think some of that may be a lot of noise and some of it's great advice as well. So I think it depends a bit on the category and also on the brand itself. So when you get into more prestige brands, when you get into more technical kinds of brand, where you get into categories where the potential for counterfeit is quite worrying, those are going to be big winners when it comes to D2C. I think when you get into a lot of the FMCG, especially when you get into more everyday products and where it usually forms part of your weekly grocery shopping activities, my instinct is that there's less of an opportunity there. People want the convenience of being able to buy all of their weekly shop in one place, dump it into the cart, and off we go. I don't want to be going to 30 or 40 different vendors' websites to get my weekly shopping. So there is obviously, you as a brand where you're doing D2C, you have greater control over the experience. You can manage the quality of the stuff that's going out, knowing that you're always going to be delivering full quality goods. But at the same time, there's a real trade-off when it comes to the convenience for the customer. And I think it's always that bit that we want to start with. What would be the best experience for the customer that you can deliver profitably? So I think one of the things that is worrying me, I suppose, when it comes to e-commerce, especially across Southeast Asia. I don't know to what extent this is the case in India, but I suspect it's very similar, is this obsession with sales. So every month we've got Shopee, we've got Lazada, we've got all of these different platforms doing it's a 3-3 sale, it's a 4-4 sale. It's great from the consumer perspective, but that's being largely funded by VC money, and it is compromising the success of a lot of the individual vendors. As a shopper, I love it. As a marketer, it worries me. I don't think it's very sustainable, and I think it sets the wrong tone for a lot of the brand perspectives as well. It means we're just always on the lookout for deals. So I think that kind of stuff we'll see evolve. I don't think that retailers are going to be able to continue doing that in the long term. And so from a brand perspective, that may be an impetus to move certain product lines into a D2C world. I think it's important to stress you don't need to do an either or here. You can have some things that are D2C on your website that are only available through you, and then other formats that you make available through third-party platforms. Absolutely be thinking about how you segment your strategy, and do you have special things for your heart customers, the top 20% that are your biggest customers. Can you get them onto your website with special loyalty schemes and stuff like that, but continue to serve the larger long tail on those other platforms as well? So don't see any of these things as either or. A lot of the time, the best answer is to try and juggle a bit of both. I know that means additional resource and investments of time and effort. It's a hassle, but at the same time, it's really important that we're maximizing the potential for profit out of the stuff that we're selling online. And at the moment, that's being squeezed. So explore and experiment would be my top tip.
Awesome. So do you think we also, under kind of limit our understanding of D2C to only doing those sales? Won't it be like a larger picture of content and, talking to your consumer, creating the loyalty? All those things would really typically fall under D2C, right?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the challenges in marketing. We love to come up with these terms and then nobody has the same definition of them. So is D2C just transacting on your website, or are you looking at the entire consumer journey and trying to make sense of that? So if we think about shopping, a lot of shopping is browsing. It's not actually making a decision and making a purchase, especially when we're talking about things like fashion or home furnishings, whatever else it may be. So once upon a time, we would do that whole window shopping thing. You go to the market, you go to the mall, you'd look around, you'd absorb things that you weren't looking to buy today, but you were forming opinions and you were having things that you were seeding in your mind that would grow over time. And I think a lot of marketers miss the opportunity to do that when it comes to digital channels. I think so much of our efforts are focused on the last mile transaction. And that's critically important, don't get me wrong, but all of the stuff that leads up to that, we're not investing as much effort into seeding in the way that we would have done in physical retail. So whether that's social media content, whether it's stuff on your website, whether it's third-party sort of partnerships, whatever else it may be, think much earlier back into the journey. What's the very first opportunity you have to introduce your brands and your products to the audiences that you care about? And how can you just make sure that they're always there? The salience stuff is critically important. And it's not just about when somebody's ready to check out that you want to introduce your brand to them, because a lot of the time that's too late. So yeah, absolutely. Social shopping, digital shopping, call it what you want. I think there's an awful lot of opportunities that we're missing out on, and content is a hugely important part of that. So we need to get more savvy at the brand side of things and not just the conversion side of things.
Absolutely. Any other untapped opportunities that you want to talk about? Yes, definitely begin much earlier than the sales piece.
Yeah, so one of the things that really stood out in this year's data for me was just how many people are still visiting brand websites. I think a lot of marketers will be surprised by that. And again, this is going to vary considerably by category. I confess I don't go and visit a soap manufacturer's website on a weekly basis, but there are categories where I regularly go and look at these categories. So there are certain places where it's set and forget. We've made a decision and we rarely change it. So toothpaste is a prime example of that. When was the last time you changed your toothpaste brand? But there are other things that we do regularly get involved in and visit the websites of. But regardless of what category you're in, websites are still a critical opportunity. So don't neglect them and don't just make them about the cold, hard facts. People are looking for information, but they also want to know more interesting and fun stuff about your brand. They want to know about your purpose as a company. think about all the things that people may want to know. The good news is you don't need to have a content calendar for a website. You can create stuff, you can keep adding to it, but it's not nearly as painful as social media when you need to keep feeding the beast, if you like. So that would probably be my top recommendation. I think there's a lot of other surprises in the data around the kinds of content people are looking for. So how to do stuff is a hugely important category from a user perspective. So audiences out there really want to know how to achieve the things that they care about. And I think that's a big untapped opportunity from a marketing perspective. We focus too much on entertainment, and we're forgetting that a lot of the time the educational, the informational content is hugely valuable. There's loads more, but I'll pause there.
Absolutely. No, I think that is great advice. So start with your website, make sure it is on point, and also teach the consumer how to use their products. What is the value proposition? I love it. And coming from on the same line, shoppable content or live stream commerce, as you said, is making great inroads into Southeast Asia. It's growing at a really, really big pace in India as well. We have Shopify, Unbox, Magento, you name it. So how do you see this kind of trending in the future? Content driving commerce. What are the big trends here?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. The industry is very excited about the shoppable posts, if you like, especially on social media. So a lot of those tie-ups that we've seen with the e-commerce technologies integrating into social media platforms and stuff. The interesting thing is that the shoppers themselves are not desperate for this. It's not a key driver when you ask them what they're looking for. So if you ask people what they really want, free shipping is always the number one thing. It's greatly ironic that we know, if you ask us, it's like, where does free shipping come in? We know that we're going to pay for it somehow, but there's this perception thing. So free shipping, easy returns, all of those kinds of things are much more important conversion tactics than having shoppable posts. But that doesn't mean that shoppable posts are not a good opportunity. I think that we need to start thinking of shoppable posts within a mix, though. This is not your strategy. This is one bit of your strategy. And I like to think of it a little bit like the shelves that you see when you get to the checkout, or it's the little stall on the street that is looking for foot traffic. A lot of it is impulse purchase. So it works really well for cheap fast fashion. It works really well for snack foods and that kind of stuff. It's not going to be the most obvious place to be selling high value, high ticket items like your next oven or something like that. People aren't going to make a spur of the moment decision based on a single social media post. And while sure enough, some people may just be in the market to buy, and if you're posting a good deal, that may be enough to tip them over the edge. But that's a very small fraction of your audience, even for people who are in the market to buy today. So be very careful how many eggs you put in that basket. I think they're a fantastic opportunity. And I confess I've been swayed to buy things that I've been looking at for a while by some of these posts. But if you think that this is the answer to all your prayers, you're going to be disappointed. So use it as part of your overall strategy. I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Shiny. This is, it's shopping as an experience right the way through the journey, not just at the checkout.
Absolutely. So I think value for money, a really good tool in your toolkit, but it should not be the only tool in that toolkit. We need to have so much more. And, the consumer is really looking at understanding a brand from various perspectives, if I can put it, so not just shoppable content, your website, your checkout, everything makes sense. So there are so many companies, comes to the next question, so many companies who are trying to get into this game of shoppable content. And of course, it's not easy to produce content at scale, especially with the COVID going around. What are some of the challenges that they need to keep in mind before, jumping into this bandwagon?
Yes, I think because you're going to need a certain level of technology to be able to deliver this kind of stuff, there's quite a high barrier to entry psychologically. Actually, the tools are incredibly easy to use, but you may need to pay a little bit to use them, and you need to get your head around what you're going to use them for. So do your research, understand what it is that's involved, have a chat to the vendors. So you've already mentioned the likes of Shopify and Magento. They've got huge teams that are dedicated to helping people exactly like you. So have a chat with them, find out what they suggest. Obviously, they're going to be trying to sell you their wares. That's absolutely expected, but they will teach you what these things can do and how to use them. So put the burden of education onto the companies themselves. Don't feel you need to always go out and do a lot of this research for yourself, because a lot of the time it's just easier to get these vendors to come and tell you what they're doing. And the technology is fantastic. Once you see it, you're like, wow. But that's when you pause. So you say, right, and now I know what it can do. What do I want it to do, and what should it do for my business? And I think it's there that you might want to ask them whether it's possible to do a trial to see whether this works for your specific brand with your specific audience. There's absolutely no harm in asking. Whether they say yes is a different thing. But I think a lot of the time, test and learn is the best way to do this, whether it is using shoppable posts, even whether it comes to advertising on new platforms. My tip is always try it before you make big decisions and big investments. If you try it and it doesn't work, give it one more chance. If it doesn't work the second time, right, you know you can park that because there's many other opportunities. In reality, you're going to discover probably that it does work, but in a very specific kind of way. And it's that learning that you want to take away. Be very brutal with your analysis of your success. What worked? What was good about it? And what would I repeat and what would I not repeat about that experiment? So that'd be my top tip. Play around with it and get help from the platforms to do that playing around with it to learn what works.
Absolutely. So have a clear vision, be a scientist, experiment, and there are a world of people out there to help you with it. So don't feel lost or alone.
Definitely.
So on this, so everyone, like you said, we're asking people to help us do this, that, and the other. And so is the consumer, like you said, everyone is looking at how-to content, how to, what was that? The Dalgano coffee, and if I'm pronouncing this right, and then everyone baked a banana cake for sure last year. And so the role of influencers really has become so paramount, because they are the ones who are teaching out how to put on makeup and how to bake this and how to set up the house and so many things. Given the amount of, kind of, I would say they have a love-hate relationship with brands. There's a lot of positive things out there, and all of us as consumers love to follow these influencers. There is also a lot of brands who want to work with them and don't want to work with them. How do you see this space growing, and what advice would you give to brands who are looking to work with influencers?
No question at all that influencers are growing in terms of the influence that they have. I think the really important word here is influence, though. And I think this is where a lot of marketers are getting distracted. We forget that it's about influence and we think that it's about reach. We're looking for people as a channel to get our messages through to the audiences. We're completely misunderstanding the opportunity if that's what we're doing, because it's a lot easier to buy reach on a platform like Facebook than it is to try and work with an influencer to deliver that reach. An influencer is a human being. We need to treat influencer marketing much more like we treat HR than we treat buying Facebook ads. Why is this influencer doing what they're doing? How have they become a recognized expert in their field, if that's what they are? And how can we use them as a member of our team rather than just a megaphone to shout the stuff that we want to say? If you're getting an influencer to repeat and parrot messages that you've written for them, I'm going to be very blunt, you're wasting your time and you're annoying the influencer, because the influencer has built a reputation by being an expert, or whatever it may be, an admired person for their audience. Tap into that. They are the best focus group you will ever get, because they know how to engage their audience. If they didn't, they wouldn't be an influencer in the first place. So use them as your agency, use them as a member of your team, learn from them and go to them and say, this is what I want to achieve. What's the best way of doing it? Don't say, I want to sell millions of products, because obviously if an influencer knew how to do that, they would create the products and they would sell them, and suddenly you'd be out of a job and your business would collapse. How do they fit into your broader marketing team, not into your marketing toolbox? So treat them as human beings, number one. But I think it goes back a little bit to understanding what value those influencers are creating for their audiences. You've got some people who are celebrities, so the Kardashians, the best example here. Are the Kardashians really the best people to look to when you're looking for advice about vitamin supplements? Ooh, I think a lot of consumers out there would be nervous about that kind of stuff. Sure, they know a lot about makeup. That's brilliant. Go to them for that. But anything beyond that, we're just tapping into celebrity. And we've seen many cases over the years, even in conventional media, back in the days of, sorry, Pepsi, but Michael Jackson, Pepsi tie-up back in the 80s and early 90s. it was risky because you were dependent on an individual there. So be very conscious of the challenges. But I think, what is it that you're trying to get across to your audience? Start with the question, what is it that I want to change about my audience's attitudes, beliefs, perceptions, emotions related to my brand? Not I want to sell more stuff, but in order to sell more stuff, what needs to change about the way my audience thinks and feels about my brand? And how can an influencer help do that? Is it a lack of confidence that we're suffering from? Is it a lack of understanding of how the product works? Is it a lack of understanding of where it fits in their lives? Those are the kinds of questions you want to be going in with, not can you get 1 million sales to 1 billion people in the next week? Because nobody can do that by magic.
Absolutely. So treat your influencer as a human being, not a machine, and try to distinguish between celebs and influencers. Really, don't give them, treat them like a member of your team. I really like that one, treat them like a member of your team. Tell them to advise you, because we're all reaching out for help, and any help that we get is amazing. Great.
Absolutely.
That is fantastic advice on using influencers. Now, coming to tech innovations, we have so many of them, and that toolkit that we need to build needs to be compact, and we need to understand what all is in there for sure. So e-commerce businesses and retail businesses are on top of the game, I would say. They have machine learning, they have artificial intelligence and robotics and AR, VR. I don't know half these terms that I'm talking about. But what are the biggest trends here? What has really caught your eye when you see retail marketing happening? What are the biggest go-tos that people shouldn't ignore?
So I'm going to be really annoying and turn the question around. So I'm always going to start from the audience's perspective. And a lot of those technologies should be completely invisible to the end user. So machine learning, obviously, it's a huge opportunity. Artificial intelligence, incredible. But the audience should never need to know that it's there. And they should really not have to think about it when they're experiencing it on your website. So my analogy here is you don't need to understand how HTTP works to be able to use the internet. And it should be exactly the same in machine learning, AI, all of these technologies too. Blockchain, exactly the same stuff. We get very hung up on all of these amazing technologies, but those are for us as businesses to get our heads around. The customer should just come in and have an amazing experience every time. And it's that bit that I really, really want to stress here. Which of these technologies and using them in different ways, which of those is going to give you the opportunity to deliver the best possible experience that you want to deliver for your audience? Don't get distracted by the technology, because it's just a way of bringing your vision to life. Start with your vision, start with what the experience for the audience should be, and then go looking for the tools. So one of the analogies that I always make with my clients is it's a little bit like you're a carpenter and you sit down and you go, which of my tools do I want to use today? Nobody does that. They don't go, oh, I have a hammer. I wonder if there's any nails around the house that need. You kind of look at it and you go, I want to build a table. I need to mount a photo on my wall. What are the tools that are going to allow me to do that? As marketers, we love to walk into the shiny toy shop. Sorry, the shiny, not shiny you, the shiny new toys syndrome, right? We're going to go in and buy the latest toys without really knowing what we're going to do with them. And I admit I'm guilty of the same thing in my business too, but we've got to be a lot more ruthless. We've got to say, the limited budgets that we've got, which of these tools is really going to deliver the most disproportionate impact on success for my business and deliver the best possible experiences for my audience? So yes, you do need to understand a bit more about machine learning and AI and all these great things, but in all honesty, you need to start with your vision first and then go and research the technologies that may be able to help with that. If the technology is going to help, sure, read about it on a Saturday morning on the couch, but don't waste your working time doing it because your resources are limited. The one thing I would say that I'm interested in from an e-commerce perspective, though, and I think will become more important, is augmented reality. Don't look at it as a novelty, though. I think the real opportunity here is when it comes to things like fashion, allowing people to try things on, just being able to show people stuff in their house. So we've seen some great stuff from IKEA where they show you what a sofa looks like in your own living room. Practical utilitarian uses of augmented reality that make the audience's life better. I can see huge opportunities for that. But things like virtual reality, I get nervous. It's going to be great for entertainment and gaming, but I'm suspicious about it from an e-commerce perspective because it all feels like novelty today. Sorry to the vendors.
Absolutely. And no, absolutely. I think from a consumer's perspective, augmented reality is probably easier to use than virtual reality. So unless I want to be gaming for the next 3 hours, I don't want to really put on that headset and buy a dress. No. So yeah, I think that is great advice.
Critically for that
Go
one,
ahead,
the
go ahead.
devices that people have in their pocket, if you're expecting people to buy a new device in order to be able to do the stuff that you're doing, you're sadly mistaken. But if you can take advantage of the phones that most people are having in their pocket already, that's onto a winner, which is why I'm confident that AR is going to be a thing. We've already seen Apple putting huge amounts of emphasis on augmented reality. It's something that already exists well within Android as well. So I think this is going to be something we'll see advance quite quickly over the next couple of years.
Amazing. So, Simon, you've given us a lot of advice, especially for the marketers out there who are really in the eye of the storm. I would say we thought it would end with December of 2020, but sadly not. Parting thoughts based on consumer behavior, based on what we've seen in 2020, and we have a reasonable expectation of what 2021 will be like. What advice would you give to marketers for 2021 and 22?
So I think I'll repeat what I said at the beginning. Don't panic. I think there's a lot of stress. We think that this new normal, whatever we want to call it, is somehow this sort of crazy time that we need to get our heads round. There has been change, but the good news is that the consumer is just as upended as we are. So everybody's figuring it out. Don't panic, take your time. It's not like you have to solve everything today. I think a lot of the behaviors that we saw emerge last year were extensions of things that people were already starting to do. COVID has only accelerated them. Some things may have started to become more obvious to you as marketers that your audience is doing, but nonetheless, the data's all out there. Just don't get distracted by all the shiny new toys again. Just go back and go, what is it that I need to do as a business? What are my top 3 priorities? Are there technologies that can help with that? And if so, how do I find the best one? But everything else beyond that is just going to distract you from your essential day-to-day stuff. So yeah, the new normal, whatever you want to call it, it's still just business as usual in my mind. It's just dealing with the crap we have to deal with every day and trying to do the best job of it.
Absolutely. So have a very clear vision, keep it simple, look for value for money when you're buying that tool set or, building that tool set, I would say. And we're all here to help. So do reach out to all
Definitely.
of us and to all those great technology companies out there. There is a lot of information out there for everyone. Great. Thank you so much, Simon. It's been such a wonderful and, eye-opening conversation. I think it's really important for us to hear some of these things again and again to kind of make sense of this and get to the realities of it. So thank you so much. It's been such a fantastic conversation.
Great. Thanks for having me.